This week's episode is sponsored by Easy Roller Dice.
RPG players can never have enough dice, and these affordable and high-quality dice are perfect for building a personalized collection on a lightweight budget.
Their dice come in a huge range of colors, materials, and fonts, so you can have the perfect set to match your characters, spells, and monsters.
We've been using their awesome dice trays at our own game table to keep all of our dice in one place for years now.
Visit EasyRollerDice.com or follow the links in the description below to visit their online store.
You'll also find below our discount code, which you can use to save on select purchases.
And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are ranking the subclasses available to Paladins in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This is part 1 of our series, where today we are going to be ranking the 3 subclasses introduced in the Player's Handbook, the Oath of Devotion, the Oath of the Ancients, and the Oath of Vengeance, as well as the Dungeon Master's Guide's Oathbreaker Paladin.
If you look on the screen right now, you're going to see the criteria that we used to rank the subclasses. We've pitted the subclasses against each other, not those of other classes. Also, keep in mind that we are not taking into account role-playing, as we believe that every paladin has an equal opportunity to be role-played really, really well. And although we may hint at multi-classing as an option, it is not one of the core features that we're looking at in the paladin subclasses.
And we are going to be taking a look at the subclasses introduced in Xanathar's Guide to Everything and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Stay tuned for those episodes coming down the pipeline. Of course, we do not take a look at the subclasses that have not been published, but only previewed in Unearthed Arcana, however. So we will just be talking about the published subclasses only. We are directly comparing the subclasses to each other to figure out which ones add the most on the amazing base class that is the Paladin.
One thing to keep in mind with the Paladin subclasses is that they gain a lot of their features early on and then have a large gap before they gain anything else. They get their Oath spells and Channel Divinity right away at level 3, they get another feature at level 7, and then nothing else until level 15, and then again at 20. Because of this, we tend to favor looking at the Channel Divinity, the Oath spells, and the level 7 ability, as that is what most groups are going to be experiencing. We are, of course, taking into account the level 15 and 20 abilities, but they won't come online until much later in the game, and they won't be used in as many campaigns as the early options. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
The very first subclass we're going to be taking a look at today is the Oath of Devotion, for paladins who swear a sacred oath to serve a higher power, such as a deity, an angel, or the ideals of goodness and justice themselves. When paladins select this oath right away at 3rd level, they're going to get 2 Channel Divinity options, Sacred Weapon and Turn the Unholy. With Sacred Weapon, as an action, you can bless one of the weapons that you're carrying. It becomes a magical weapon, and you add your Charisma modifier, a minimum of +1, to the attack rolls made with that weapon for the next minute. The Turn the Unholy feature is your basic turn undead, but it also works against fiends as well, sending them scattering until they take damage if they fail a wisdom saving throw.
If we look at the Oath spells provided to the Devotion Paladin, a lot of them are ones that the Paladin already has available on their spell list. The options here that aren't usually presented to Paladins are Sanctuary, Freedom of Movement, and Flame Strike. All pretty decent spells.
At level 7, Paladins gain the Aura of Devotion feature, meaning that they can't be charmed while they're conscious, and this is an aura that extends to allies that are within 10 feet of them, and then eventually to a range of 30 feet at level 18.
At level 15, they gain the ability Purity of Spirit, which means that they are always under the effects of the Protection from Good and Evil spell. If you read the description of the spell, that basically means that a ton of different types of enemies are going to have disadvantage on attack rolls against them. This includes aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, and undead. A majority of the monsters presented in Dungeons & Dragons.
Especially the ones that you're going to be encountering at higher levels of play that have really scary attacks.
At 20th level, you gain Holy Nimbus, which allows you as an action to emanate bright light within 30 feet and dim light for 30 more feet beyond that. Enemy creatures that start their turn within the bright light area take 10 radiant damage. And on top of that, you have advantage on saving throws against spells that are cast by fiends or undead. You can activate this ability once per day.
The Oath of Devotion Paladin is the archetypal defensive healer type Paladin. It doesn't really get a lot of extra healing abilities, although some of the spells that it always has prepared will help you protect your allies, such as Lesser Restoration and Dispel Magic, as well as Freedom Movement and Commune. The Turn Undead ability is great, especially because it works on fiends, and Sacred Weapon is actually really highly underrated because you can basically make your weapon almost a magical weapon. It just takes an action to use, so it's a little bit difficult to use at the start of combat because you kind of have to anticipate it and light up your sword and then go to town. If it was a bonus action, it'd be much, much better. The high-level ability, Purity of Spirit, I think is super underrated for having all that disadvantage on attack rolls against so many creature types that are common at high levels of play. Overall, I think the Oath of Devotion presents some nice defensive and support perks with a little bit of cool offense in the form of the turning the Unholy ability and the Sacred Weapon feature. But nothing about this screams awesome combos are here or cool offense. And there's going to be many combat encounters against humanoids, giants, and monstrosities that your abilities just aren't relevant in at all. Given this, I think overall the subclass gets a B from me. In a campaign where there's going to be lots of fiends and undead with really, really scary abilities, the value of the subclass rises up. But the value of the paladin in general rises up in those campaigns anyways. So as they say, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I'm not sure that the defensive advantages of the Oath of Devotion outweigh the offensive advantages of some of the other subclasses in a similar campaign situation where you're fighting tons of undead and fiends. Paladins are going to feel overpowered in those campaigns no matter what.
Those are all extremely fair points. I will tell you that reading over the Devotion Paladin, there were some things that stuck out to me and made me give the Devotion Paladin an A. And that is things like the ability to just shut down being charmed for you and anybody near you. If your party is close to you and you're in a situation where charming could undo your entire party. Charmed isn't something that comes up a lot, but it can get really messy when it does. If one of your party members gets charmed, then the whole dynamic of a battle changes. If you can shut that down with just having that ability, that's an excellent feature. Also, the constantly having disadvantage on attacks from majority of enemies. I do agree that some campaigns might not use these enemies, but I would safely say that most of them will in some capacity. So when I looked at this subclass, I saw a bunch of abilities that weren't necessarily my favorite paladin abilities, nor is it my favorite spell list. But there was nothing here that wasn't at least good. And that's what made me lean into the A.
I think my counterpoint for giving it a B is quite simply, you gotta hope that your dungeon master is putting the situations in front of you. The situational advantages that the Oath of Devotion grants, I think, are entirely relevant and good. I just don't think that they're great.
One thing that you actually did catch me with is I have fond memories of playing a paladin, and one thing that I hated as a paladin is doing anything with my first turn that wasn't getting into the thick of it and slaying monsters. One of my favorite abilities about the Devotion Paladin is the empowering your weapon. Mm-hmm. If you could use that ability as a bonus action, it would raise the rank of this subclass. Because it's an action, it means that if you get dropped into combat, you have to forego your first turn to make your weapon attacks better. That actually does take away a little bit from me. I can see how, compared to some of the other subclasses presented, this would be more useful in certain campaigns than others, therefore making it a B.
Yep.
I think it's a very strong choice. I do not think that there's anything wrong with this subclass. But you might get presented with a situation where it's weaker than other subclass options.
So next up we come to the Oath of the Ancients Paladin. This is a sworn defender to their ancestors, or in some cases to nature. It has a quite fun druidic twist, and I really love the idea of an elvish Oath of the Ancients Paladin. It really kind of hits this cool vibe to me. When you take the Oath of the Ancients, you're going to get 2 new channel divinity options. These are Nature's Wrath and Turn the Faithless. Now, Turn the Faithless is another Turn Undead type of ability, but it works against fiends and fae instead of undead and fiends, but it's otherwise relatively similar. The Nature's Wrath power allows you to use an action to conjure up spectral vines to ensnare a foe that is within 10 feet of you, leaving them restrained and caught in place. They can make strength or dexterity saving throws to resist this, or to break out of it at the end of their turns.
With the Oath spells that you get as an Oath of the Ancients Paladin, it's a really unique spell list, borrowing from things like the Ranger and the Druid to add more nature-oriented spells to the Paladin. You get such spells as Ensnaring Strike, Misty Step, Moonbeam. At higher levels, you're going to get spells like Plant Growth, Ice Storm, Tree Stride, Stone Skin, all really unique spells for a Paladin spell list, and some very, very useful.
At level 7, we're going to gain the feature that most people are here for, the Aura of Warding. This fantastic feature protects your Paladin against magic by giving you resistance to damage from spells. This aura extends 10 feet to allies within that range, and then at level 18, it extends to 30 feet. One thing to be very clear, I've talked to many people who have a very grave misconception about this ability, and believe that this ability is an aura of magic resistance that gives you and allies advantage on saving throws against spells. That is not what Aura of Warding does. It gives you resistance to the damage from spells. These are very, very different things and should not be confused, because it means that an Aura of Warding is a great way to protect yourself and your party against Fireball, but it does absolutely nothing to protect you against Hypnotic Pattern or Fear or Banishment, beyond the fact that Paladins have the aura that boosts their own saving throws and their allies' saving throws.
At 15th level, you're going to gain Undying Sentinel. This basically just means that if you're dropped to 0 hit points, you get to get back up with 1 hit point. On top of that, you cannot be negatively affected by magically aging.
At level 20, you gain the Elder Champion power, which you can activate once per day as an action. Once activated, its benefits last for 1 minute, and you regain 10 hit points at the start of each of your turns. You can cast your Paladin spells as a bonus action, and creatures within 10 feet of you have disadvantage on their saving throws against your Paladin spells. Wow, that's a great power.
So the Oath of the Ancients is one of the most loved Paladin subclasses. And I've read through it a few times and tried to analyze it as intensely as I could. And I landed on giving this a B. And here's why. The misconception about the 7th level ability. It is not magic resistance. And in fact, there are so many things in the world scarier than magical damage from spells. This isn't going to save you against Dragon's Breath weapon or the Mind Blast of a Mind Flayer. It's not protecting you from that much. It's actually quite niche, in my opinion, in its execution. If it was magic resistance, that would be way cooler. This being the key element of the subclass that people love and adore, I think it's actually quite niche in its implications. The rest of the abilities are pretty cool, but in my opinion, situational. As well as the spell list, this does feel a bit more nature-oriented, and I do think that beyond that ability, which I still think is the best ability this has to offer, the 7th level ability, you're taking half damage. Half damage from a fireball, from a finger of death, from a meteor swarm, is going to save your life. And I feel like it is situational, and if you're not fighting a lot of scary magic users that are dropping big bad spells on you, if you get mind controlled or banished or polymorphed, that's going to be good for nothing. So I give it a B.
I think we might get strung up by the mob for not giving this an S tier ranking. But I do agree that it is not an S tier subclass. I completely think that I think that it gets overrated because people do think it is magic resistance. And if it was magic resistance, if it was advantage on saving throws against spells, that combined with the Paladin's bonus to saving throws would be absolutely insane. And when I ran Tomb of Annihilation that had an Oath of the Ancients Paladin playing in that campaign, it was very surprising how many game sessions we would go without that Aura of Warding becoming relevant. When it was relevant, it was extremely relevant. But even in a battle against a Lich, the Lich could just go, hey buddy, Bourse Cage, have fun getting out of there with your Misty Steps. Damage is the least scary thing a spellcaster can do to you. Flat out. And oftentimes when I use spellcasters in combat encounters, I don't necessarily look to them as a dungeon master to be the damage dealers. They're scary AoE damage, and I do think the biggest feather in the cap here is that this subclass saves your party from AoE damage. And that is a really big and significant thing. And that alone to me is worth giving this an A. I think the Misty Step, the Ensnaring Strike, the other cool things on the spell list all kind of come together to build what I think is a really strong subclass. I think it's an A. But I think it's overrating the ability to give it an S tier ranking for the straight up reason that damage from spells is pretty niche. As Kelly said, this doesn't protect you against Mind Blast, doesn't protect you against Dragon's Breath, doesn't protect you against a Beholder's Eye Rays. There's a list of a ton of abilities that are very common that monsters have that they don't protect you against. And there's a lot of spellcasters out there that don't really care that you're going to resist their magic damage.
I think I'm easily willing to give this an A. I think going into this, what shocked me is I didn't see what everybody else saw, and so it made me take a step back and say, what do I actually see here? I think maybe because of that, I may have downplayed some of the usefulness rather than seeing what its potential could be. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't feel like this is the S tier. I feel like everything here is good, but nothing blows me away. Not even that 7th level ability. It doesn't blow me away. It's one of the more useful Paladin abilities.
It is a good ability. It is one of the best reasons to play the subclass. But it is overrated, and I'm speaking from a position of experience, having run campaigns with Oath of the Ancients Paladins and seeing all the times when this ability was not relevant.
I think there's sometimes just better options, and what we're really looking for an S tier is something that is applicable in broad ways.
Yeah, and magic is broad. Like
it is.
It is really broad, and so that's the argument for giving it an S tier ranking, is that magic is a thing that you encounter quite broadly. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition values offense over defense because you can use offensive abilities in a proactive manner. And neither the Oath of Devotion nor the Oath of the Ancients present compelling offensive abilities that can be used in a proactive manner. They are all reactive and defensive. And reactive and defensive abilities, in my books, are flat out weaker than a proactive offensive one.
This subclass is excellent, and we're not trying to downplay the value that this subclass brings. It is a phenomenal subclass. It is one of the best Paladin subclasses, but it's not going to make our S ranking.
If the fact that we didn't give this class an S tier ranking makes you simmer with rage, you may want to consider looking at the next subclass that we're looking at and swearing an Oath of Vengeance in the name of the Oath of the Ancients. The Oath of Vengeance, I think we have to declare our bias because both of us have played Oath of Vengeance Paladins in each other's campaigns. But let's talk about the abilities and why they're so awesome.
When you choose the Vengeance Paladin at 3rd level, you gain 2 Channel Divinity options. Abjure Enemy, which lets you target a creature and they become frightened of you if they fail a Wisdom saving throw. You also have Vow of Enmity, which you can trigger as a bonus action, choose a target, and you now, for 1 minute, have advantage on attacks against that target.
Oath of Enmity is amazing, but the spell list is mind-blowingly good, giving you spells like Hunter's Mark, Hold Person, Misty Step, Haste, Banishment, Dimension Door, Scrying, and Hold Monster. This spell list is chock full of amazing spells that increase both the Paladin's offensive capabilities as well as its mobility in profound ways. The combination of getting both Misty Step and Dimension Door and Haste means vengeance comes swiftly to your enemies.
At 7th level, you gain Relentless Avenger. When you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, you can now move half your speed and ignore opportunity attacks yourself, making you even better at tracking down and killing your foes.
At level 15, you gain the Soul of Vengeance power, which augments your Vow of Enmity power. The target of your enmity, whenever it makes an attack, you can then make an attack against it as a reaction.
At 20th level, you're going to gain Avenging Angel. Once per day, as an action, you can sprout angelic wings and gain a flying speed of 60 feet, as well as an aura of menace that frightens creatures nearby. So, after all of that, it's quite obvious that this subclass is going to get the D ranking. No, I'm kidding. It's an S.
It's an S.
It's an S tier.
It's amazing.
There's nothing bad here. There's nothing bad.
No.
One of the best, not one of, it is the best spell list for oath spells that a paladin gets. There is nothing in here that isn't great. I'm going to tell you right now, like Misty Step and Haste are two amazing options. Misty Step also is available to the Oath of the Ancients, which is key. But combine that with things like Haste and Dimension Door, you can teleport out of situations in many meaningful ways. The amount of times I used Haste on a paladin, it makes the Vengeance Paladin, which is already scary without Haste, even better.
The Oath of Vengeance addresses an issue with the Paladin, which is their mobility. But between their spells, they gain this unprecedented ability to just get stuck in there. Because you can Misty Step in, you can get hasted up yourself, doubling your speed, giving you those extra attacks. All of these spells are everything that you want as a Paladin, and you really, really can rack up the damage. It's one of the things where you end up with this really difficult decision of, are you going to use your spells to smite, or are you going to cast the actual spells? Because you really want to do both. And that, combined with the fact that there are so many things competing for your bonus action. You might have Polearm Master. You might have Sentinel. You might want to have Misty Step. You might swear your Oath of Enmity. You might want to be doing all these things with your bonus action. So it can be really tricky to decide how you're going to play with your Oath of Vengeance Paladin. But those are all options. Those are all options which give you adaptability in the middle of the battle. The most difficult thing with playing an Oath of Vengeance Paladin is choosing the right thing to do.
But that's the beautiful thing here is there's rarely a turn that you don't have something to do with both your action and your bonus action. And if we could talk for a second about the Vow of Enmity. The Vow of Enmity is, in my opinion, the most useful option presented to a paladin in the Channel Divinity options. When we talk about S tier, we talk about broadly applicable. There's no situation that your paladin isn't going to smash things with a sword and probably want to smite them and probably want advantage on those attacks. Playing a Vengeance Paladin, I remember us going up against a large demon that was several CR ratings higher than we should have been able to handle at that level. It was going to be a deadly encounter. I got hasted by the party bard. I went in and swore my Vow of Enmity on the demon, and I think I crit it for some unreasonable amount of damage using the highest level spell slot I could on a smite and rolling the biggest handful of dice I could. That moment, I mean, Vow of Enmity just gaining advantage on smiting a fiend or an undead or anything, something that the paladin's going to be always doing. It's endlessly applicable.
Yep, and the key thing about Vow of Enmity is that it regenerates on a short rest. It takes a bonus action to activate. It lasts for 1 minute. And it applies to all your attacks against a single enemy. It is a single enemy. That enemy is dead. And as a dungeon master, dealing with an Oath of Vengeance Paladin is transformative because it's very hard to escape from an Oath of Vengeance Paladin. Whatever the number one target on the battlefield is, the Oath of Vengeance Paladin is going to get to them, make them their Oath of Enemy, and probably kill them in 2 or 3 rounds. And having run games with all 3 of the Paladin subclasses from the Player's Handbook, not a single one of them transformed the way I had to build encounters as a dungeon master like the Oath of Vengeance Paladin. Every single encounter I had to reconsider. If I was building an encounter with spellcasters with the Oath of the Ancients Paladin, it was like, oh, well, they're just not going to be able to use damaging spells. But with the Oath of Vengeance Paladin, the question was always, is this spellcaster going to even survive 2 turns?
I think there is a possibility of bias here. As we said, we have both played Oath of Vengeance Paladins in each other's campaigns, but both of us had such incredible experiences bringing them to the table. And honestly, I think both of us could argue that this isn't just the best Paladin subclasses, but one of the strongest subclass options in the game of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
The Oath of Vengeance Paladin might be one of the strongest characters in the game of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
What's beautiful about the Paladin as a whole, though, and I do want to go on record saying this, when we talked about things like the Druid and how the Moon Druid shadowed everything else, the Battle Master Fighter shadowed everything else, the Paladin's really good in general. This doesn't shadow the other subclass options at the same degree.
Yes.
This is easily the best, but the other ones are usually great options.
There's a convincing argument for the other subclasses compared to the Oath of Vengeance Paladin. It's just, if you've never played an Oath of Vengeance Paladin, you don't know what you're missing.
It's so fun. It's so fun, and fun is a relation to what the rules are presenting to you. The better the rule set is, and the better the options given, the more fun you have at the table. And Oath of Vengeance?
Every single combat encounter, when you are playing an Oath of Vengeance Paladin, you have options on the table, you have something awesome to do, and something that this subclass gave you, which is awesome. And that is why it's an S-tier subclass.
S-tier, and yes, an Oath of Vengeance paid us a lot of money for this video.
Sometimes vengeance goes too far. Sometimes vengeance leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. That is the creed of the Oathbreaker Paladin. The Oathbreaker Paladin at 3rd level gains 2 channel divinity options. Their Dreadful Aspect, which they can use to frighten everybody within 30 feet of them, and Control Undead, which they can use to take control of an undead creature with a challenge rating that is less than their level for 24 hours on a failed wisdom saving throw.
This is similar to the Necromancer ability.
That you don't get till level 14. But you get this at level 3.
Their Oath spells are pretty great. There are some standout options here. Things like Hellish Rebuke, Animate Dead, Contagion, Dominate Person, all incredibly useful spells.
Both the Channel Divinity option and getting Animate Dead on your spell list become very relevant at level 7 when your Aura of Hate becomes active, giving the Paladin and any undead creatures within their 10-foot aura a bonus to damage rolls equal to the Paladin's Charisma modifier. Like all of the Aura powers, this extends to 30 feet at level 18. Bear in mind that the Aura of Hate bolsters the damage rolls of fiends and undead, not just friendly fiends and undead, or allied fiends and undead. All fiends and undead, even the ones you're fighting.
At level 15, they gain supernatural resistance, and they are now resistant to piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning damage from non-magical attacks.
And at level 20, you get the Dreadful Lord power, which, like all the level 20 capstones, you activate it as an action once per day. And then it sends out an aura of darkness, which causes you, as the paladin, any creatures you choose, to have the incoming attacks have disadvantage against you. In addition, enemies that are in the area of the darkness that are frightened of you take a bunch of psychic damage at the start of your turn. And then, while the aura lasts, as a bonus action, the Paladin can cause one target in the area to take necrotic damage as well. So you can get a lot of extra damage out with this ability, and some cool defenses, and it's just scary in general. It's not a bad capstone.
So when we look at the Oathbreaker Paladin, I see a lot of abilities here that actually gel really well together. Their spell list, their channel divinity, and their ability to then bolster their undead minions. You're not going to be a necromancer with an undead army, but you're going to have a few meat shields that you get to bolster up in combat, which is really cool for a paladin to be able to just throw these guys around and do some cool stuff with them. I think that all of the abilities here are really nice. The spell list, also really nice. I am looking at giving this an A. There's nothing that makes me go, oh man, this is the best subclass, but there's nothing here that I even would remotely call bad. The one thing is, and this only happened during the filming of this episode right now, is the comment about that bolstering effect for your undead affecting enemy undead and fiends as well might actually be enough for me to say it's a B tier, but I don't know if it's enough. I'm teetering on it being an A minus or a B plus.
I think you can turn that to your advantage. And the fact that you're going to have one really scary undead minion who is under your control, and you're probably going to choose an undead minion with your channel divinity power that has a bad wisdom saving throw. So it's probably going to be something big and beefy like a big ogre zombie or a beholder zombie or something that isn't really going to make that wisdom saving throw very often. It's going to be really hard to land that against a legendary monster, for instance. Probably, but you might get a Nightwalker out of it at very high levels. The limitation that it can't have a challenge rating higher than your level is a good way of clamping down on using this against boss monsters. But then you're also going to have a little posse of undead minions. It's going to take you a couple days to raise up your zombies, and they're probably going to die like meat shields, but you might see yourself surrounded by a group of, 5 or 6 undead minions that are nice little meat shields in battle that you can command with your bonus action, because it's animate dead. And I think that is really, really good. Like, it's just enough to make it awesome. I give it an A. I think it's really fantastic. I think it has a lot of role-playing baggage to it, which is worth thinking about maybe with this subclass, especially because it is in the Dungeon Master's Guide. But since we don't really factor that into our rankings, I still think it's an A. Again, I don't know if it comes out swinging like the Oath of Vengeance Paladin does, but it's good.
It's a fun paladin to play. It's got a lot of cool abilities. And yeah, you do have to talk to your DM about what the Oathbreaker's role is in your world. Depending on the way you want to go, this is a really fun option. So up on screen right now, you see our final rankings for the core subclass options for paladins presented in the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. Let's talk now about what our community gave all of these subclasses.
So kicking things off with the Oath of Devotion, we see 12% of respondents gave it an S tier ranking, 42% gave it an A tier ranking, and 38% gave it a B tier ranking, with the others falling into the lower tiers. So overwhelmingly positive, and our community loves the Oath of Devotion and gives it an A.
Yeah, I think it's a very strong contender. We gave it a B overall, but it's on the fence. I'd say it's a high B or a low A, and it sits right there.
It doesn't have any weaknesses.
For Oath of the Ancients, it got a 28% for S tier, with 37% for A and 25% for B. This lands conclusively in the A tier, but a very large group of people did want to give this the S. It's one of the higher S tier ranking that we've seen.
I'm a little surprised at how split the vote here is between B, A, and S. It is a very close consideration, with almost as many people giving it a B ranking that gave it an S ranking. This is a sign to me that many people notice that having resistance to damage from spells is not the same as magic resistance.
For Oath of Vengeance, we are looking at 41% S tier and 45% A tier, with only 11% B tier and barely any in the lower categories. Surprisingly, this gets an A tier from majority, but it still has the largest amount of S tier. At 41%, that is something to take into account.
The Oathbreaker is quite split, with 23% giving it an S tier ranking, 32% giving it an A tier, and 30% giving it a B.
Up on the screen right now, again, you see our votes, and next to that, you see the community votes. Generally speaking, I think it's safe to say that the Paladin subclasses are actually all really great. You can't go wrong playing a Paladin.
Because the community so overwhelmingly gave everything an A, I think it's interesting for us to just show, for one moment, the second highest ranking that the community gave on average to each of these subclasses, just to paint a slightly more nuanced picture. Because with the community ranking putting all 4 of these subclasses on the same A tier is very deceiving. I think that there's a very large gap in power between the Oath of Devotion and the Oath of Vengeance, and they should not be on the same tier.
What's interesting with our ranking system is everybody gave majority A, but if you look at something like the Vengeance Paladin, where majority of the entire voting population was S or A, as opposed to something like Devotion, which is more split between several different options, it really paints a different picture. And I think that's important.
Overall, though, the Paladin is one of the strongest classes in the game. You get spellcasting, you get awesome melee combat, you get to be the party face and fantastic defensive capabilities. It's very hard to go wrong with any of the Paladin subclasses, but some of the oaths do stand out a little bit more than the others.
So this has been part 1 of our tier ranking for Paladin subclasses in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Stay tuned to see how we rank the rest of the Paladin subclasses in future videos. If you've played a Paladin and have your favorite subclass, tell us about it in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. From both myself and Kelly to all of our patrons out there, a big thank you from the bottom of our hearts. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube and elsewhere, please consider becoming a patron of our project by following the links in the description below.
And don't forget to check out our live play Shadows of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/dungeon_dudes. You can find all the previous episodes of that show right up over here.
And we've got plenty more rankings for all the other subclasses in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition as we work our way through them right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.